panel, we seek to really talk about the health benefits of getting outdoors. And while we kind of all know that, we're going to learn a little bit more about the science behind that from some of the most dynamic leaders in the state. We're going to learn about some of the virtues of outdoors in our natural world that people may not think about, like the foods that we eat and the practices that we engage in, and how we kind of dig deeper into our own history and cultural practices in the state for an increased sense of well-being. So with that, we have a tremendous group of dynamos today, leaders, and I will just quickly introduce Dr. David Scrase, who everyone has come to understand is the governor's right hand on COVID response. She refers to him as New Mexico's Dr. Fauci, and that's a good thing in the state of New Mexico, but he's so much more than that, as you'll see. Dr. Dick Kozoll, who has been a leader in the health field in Cuba, New Mexico, and rural New Mexico in getting people outdoors and also trying to grow outdoor tourism. And Johnny Ortiz, who is a Michelin-trained chef who came back to his home state to really dig deeper into his roots and to connect people to the land and to have those types of experiences which are so key towards health. So with that, gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for taking time. And I would like to just ask you each to briefly introduce yourself, starting with you, Dr. Schrace.
Hey, my name's David Scrase. I'm the Secretary of Human Services. I do work with the governor on COVID. As many of you know, I'm a lifetime outdoors person and actually very, very interested in the benefits of exercise and time spent outdoors. I'm a practicing geriatrician, which is a doctor who takes care of older people. I spend an inordinate amount of my time in my office trying to get people to get out and go walk and be outside. And so really looking forward to this discussion. Just delighted to be invited to talk about one of my favorite topics.
Wonderful. Dr. Kozoll?
Yes, good morning, everybody. I am Dick Kozoll. I'm a family and preventive medicine physician, and I've just finished my 45th year of practice in the Cuba area. The last 13 of those years have been part-time with my local community health center run by Presbyterian Medical Services. And having the part-time practice has really given me some extra time to do some creative things with the community of Cuba and surrounding people. I've served as a volunteer faculty at the University of New Mexico School of Medicine, served on some national boards. I founded a local nonprofit, the Nacimiento Community Foundation, which has been an important vehicle for accomplishing a lot of our community outdoor initiatives. And I've also worked with partners to establish Step into Cuba, a program you'll hear about, I'm sure, shortly. When I'm not working, I try to be outdoors, and probably my favorite activity is exploring the magnificent public lands that surround Cuba.
Wonderful. Johnny?
Well, I was starting to mention how excited I am to be part of this discussion. My name is Johnny Ortiz. I was born and raised in Taos, New Mexico, and spent my younger kind of formative years at Taos Pueblo, where I really got interested in food and the health of food. After high school, I dropped out of college and moved around the country and kind of worked in the best restaurants I could find. And after 7 years, kind of needed to be back home working with the land here. And so now I run a small project called Shed, which is kind of amorphic at times, but largely is about celebrating nature and exploring nature and traditions and cultures of my Taos Pueblo heritage and my Hispanic heritage. A large portion of the project is based on the dinners, bringing people together, nurturing them and sharing stories. But along with that, I also dig clay from the same spot my ancestors have dug from for generations and make the ceramics for the dinners. I have a small farm. I photograph the process along the way. And so this project is largely about delving deeper into each component that makes a dinner and ultimately the health is one of the most important things to me in cooking good food for people. So I'm excited to talk more about that here today.
Nice. Well, thank you all. As we know, during this time of COVID, we have a time of increased anxiety amongst citizens, and increased reports of suicide, depression, anxiety. So we'd like to talk and ask you each to talk about the health benefits of getting outdoors from a clinical scientific standpoint. I know that you've done, particularly the docs, a lot of research on this subject. So starting with Dr. Schrace, if you could spend a little time walking us through that.
Thank you very much, Senator. Could I please have the opportunity to share my screen? So hoping you can see Human Services Department slide. I want to do a couple things that might seem a little different, but I want to start by just on behalf of everyone at the Human Services Department by acknowledging that we're on traditional lands of the first people of what today we call the state of New Mexico, including its pueblos, tribes, and nations, past and present. And as I know all the panelists do, really honor with gratitude the land, nature, and these communities. I think it's important to remember that. I could give a really long presentation, and I'm not, but this presentation will be made available to you. I didn't have time to get my outdoor pictures in time, but I put a few in the presentation. This is me last Sunday riding a bike in Algodones, New Mexico. My wife and I go on a 20-mile bike ride every Sunday morning, which conveniently at mile 14 has a Starbucks. I also like to say, and I think my favorite quip since moving here is that I never knew how much serotonin my brain could make until I moved to New Mexico. I came from Michigan, which is the third cloudiest state in the country, and New Mexico is the sunniest or second sunniest. And so it's a delight to live in a place where I can spend so much time outdoors. I'm going to go through these really quickly. I'll let you go back and review them at their leisure, but each one of these, every time there's a blue underline, is a link that will take you directly to the research article. But there's a growing body of research, particularly over the last 10 years, that really allows us all to rethink the true health benefits to being outside. We all know about vitamin D, and I don't even know if I have a slide about that. I don't think I do, that you can't really make vitamin D in your body unless you're out in sunshine. And so we can make a lot of vitamin D here in New Mexico, but people are now realizing that, particularly when they take breaks from urban environments, that it improves cognitive functioning, that it can reduce stress. The Japanese have done a huge amount of research into what they call forest bathing, which is basically just going and hanging out in a forest. They have a lot more forests than they do mountains, although they have some impressive mountains in Japan. And they actually analyzed blood chemistries of people who went from urban environments into these nature settings and found beneficial changes, some of which you'll also see later in some of the other slides. But just even sitting in a natural surrounding, you don't have to be jogging or getting your 150 minutes of aerobic exercise a week, just sitting. And even to the point that if you work in an office with a window that looks out on nature, you're less likely to have job stress than people who have no window or don't look out on a natural scene. Inflammatory markers in the body from a overnight in the forest actually go down. Having less inflammation is good, and blood pressure can be lowered by outdoor experiences. Enjoying the outdoors helps eliminate fatigue. I live in a beautiful area of New Mexico in Placitas, and so part of my daily routine is actually just to go outside my house and walk around it once. I can see the Sandia Mountains. I can see the mesas out in the Santa Ana Pueblo. I can see the northern mountains of New Mexico, and it really actually refreshes me. And so when I read this article about how you can eliminate fatigue, I know that to be quite true on a personal level. Depression and anxiety. That gets back to I never knew how much serotonin my brain could make till I moved to New Mexico. Sunlight stimulates production of a lot of brain chemicals, serotonin and dopamine, which are called the happiness chemicals. It stimulates that, and the more time you spend out in the sun, the more likely you are to generate more of those chemicals that make us happy. Kids who spend more time at play outdoors are less likely to need glasses in elementary school and in middle school as well. Again, I'm going quickly, but I just want to hit some high points here. Another study that shows lowering of blood pressure, pulse rate, cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and some of this is scientific language. You can read more about it if you like, but just tremendous benefits to being outside. Children actually with ADHD, after they went out to a park or stayed outdoors, were able to concentrate more and actually elevate their attention and improve their performance in a school setting. Creativity may well be enhanced by longer times in nature. This isn't just 25 minutes, but 4 days of immersion in nature can improve problem solving by 50%. And even, and you know, this is very preliminary data, and please don't go tell everyone you know that this is true, because what they're finding though is a correlation between higher cancer rates among people who live in areas with very little forest, namely industrialized cities, than people who live in more rural areas or have more access to nature. It's just a correlation. We're not saying it causes it yet, but it's something to pay attention to. And they factored out variables like smoking and other things that contribute to cancer survival. So startling information. Immune system improvements. This is another Japanese study. When you see forest bathing, that means it's from Japan. And lots of natural killer cell, which is a good thing to kill off cancer cells and other sorts of adverse cell development. And then lastly, people who spend more time outdoors have a lower overall risk of early death. Green spaces correlate with elder survival, and 15 of 24 disease clusters are lower in environments with more green space near where you live than ones without. This charming photo is of two of three links. This is also taken from this past Sunday. Out my bedroom window, we had a family of lynx come through. I wish I had the video to run, because the mom, with her back to us, spent about 15 minutes linking the face of her cub right in front of her. Just an amazing experience watching animals interact in nature. Certainly gives me a sense of peace and well-being just doing that. And then I do want to close, Senator, if it's okay, with just a couple more comments. One thing is that we know, the Human Services Department serves over 1 million New Mexicans. And so we have a lot of underrepresented minority groups nationally that are quite prominent here in New Mexico. And there is an underlying lack of diversity in national parks. Visitors tend to be overrepresented by white individuals. There's a long history of racial disparities in some parks and green spaces. And I'm just putting these out here, not as in any way a criticism, but since you are the leaders in the state and thinking about how to expand open spaces and opportunities for people to get outdoors and experience all the benefits that I described, please include the equality factor in how you think about those spaces, and please explicitly ask yourself the question and hopefully answer it. What can we do to include a broader diversity of people and offer services and experiences to people of every ethnic and racial group? There's some advice about this. I'm not gonna read through this, but there's sort of there is unfortunately a long history of white privilege that can bias experiences in parks and access to parks. And so I think in my feeling is the best way to do this is to create a group of people to do the planning for your outdoor spaces that represent all of the groups that you want to use it so that you can get those perspectives. And with that, there's some other resources you'll have here. I'm going to turn it back to you, Senator, to go on to other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and appreciate your final comment there about making sure that all communities have access to the outdoors, particularly disenfranchised communities. New Mexico was in fact the first state in the country when we created the Outdoor Recreation Division. We created the first of its kind outdoor equity fund to help give grants to particularly kids of low-income families, communities of color, to be able to have access to getting outdoors and learn about stewardship. But a question that we also want to ask, which is, and I'm going to feed this to Dr. Kozoll, are not only what are the health benefits, but also what are the impediments to getting outdoors for people in rural communities, because that's something I know he has spent a lot of time thinking about. So Dr. Kozoll, feel free to take it away.
Sure. Thank you for that question. One would think that if you're surrounded by fabulous places to get outdoors and have some fun, that people in rural New Mexico would have a natural advantage. But we find, at least in the Cuba area, that that's not always the case. We've actually interviewed a number of local people about what they perceive as difficulties in getting outdoors and getting some physical activity there. And some of the common obstacles include the time to do it. Often their time compromised by competing priorities, taking care of their families, keeping up with their job, getting things they need at home, so on and so forth. There's a fair amount of life chaos that interferes with regular exercise. You know, their schedules are continually are interrupted by the uncertainties. There's fear of strange places, particularly when alone. You'd think because you're in a small community that all the surrounding territory would be familiar to you, but that's not the case. Many people are very uncomfortable being alone, particularly worried about injury, about feral animals, about wild animals, and so forth. We find that there's a certain amount of embarrassment, particularly on the part of new explorers of the public lands, embarrassment about being seen by other community members, about being seen as not as fit as others. There's difficulty with weather, with surface conditions of trails. There's difficulty getting transportation to trailheads. You know, we can set up beautiful places for visitors to drive to and park, but it's a different matter for local people who don't have reliable transportation. And last but not least, there's a heavy burden of chronic disease in rural New Mexico, and so many people have medical problems that can interfere with exercise. Now, each of these obstacles certainly has some mitigating intervention that can improve the situation, and we've certainly been working on that in the Cuba area, but that's a fair summary of what some rural people may experience.
Okay, thank you. Johnny, would you like to give your own answer to the last couple questions?
Yeah, so I mentioned kind of earlier about my delving into each step of the dinner process, and one of that is the food that I serve and how to grow it better, but also how to have it taste better and how to nurture people better with it. And so one of the things that I kind of realize with getting outdoors and being healthy is this kind of physical component of not only exercise, but you can do indoors. But by being outdoors and being able to support your microbiome by kind of like taking in the air around you, you know, being close to the ground, and all these things contribute to our microbial biodiversity, which kind of helps strengthen our immune system. So I think exercise is a big key, but by being outdoors and getting that exercise, you're getting that added benefit of kind of adding to your biodiversity. But then there's also the mental health component that seems pretty strong now with COVID, especially how isolation is a big part of trying to offset the impacts by COVID. And kind of when you look into isolation, it's something that is kind of sometimes seen as like a large proponent to depression. One of the worst things we can do to a human is isolate them, like solitary confinement. So I think getting outdoors is a great way to connect to something, especially nature, and I think it has huge benefits for our mental health and our physical health. Yeah.
Thank you. And we're going to go a little deeper into just the wealth of health resources that are out in nature that you utilize, and we can all utilize in our cooking and food choices, and how important that is. So why don't we, because we are in a time of COVID, and there's a lot of discussion about feeling like getting outdoors is the panacea to not being exposed to it, and that there are no risks to being outdoors. In fact, that's not the case. And so, Dr. Schrace, I'd like to ask you to kind of walk through what considerations people should take and what protections they should take when they're outdoors recreating to protect themselves and others from COVID transmission, as well as what are some of the myths that people have about that as well.
Great. Yeah. I hear a lot of people say about how much safer it is outdoors, or that the science shows that it's much safer outdoors. And actually, that's not true yet. There's very little good scientific evidence that it's safer outdoors. There is evidence that it's more dangerous inside. And, and one of the major issues and worries people have about indoor dining is not only are you inside in a closed space, but you have your masks off. And we know that being inside in a closed space, particularly if it's in any way crowded, is a surefire way to put yourself at risk for coronavirus. And so that's something that we're also looking at and trying to monitor, but really eagerly hoping that we'll get some scientific evidence that shows more safety. There is, in some countries that looked at this in detail, they found a lot more secondary cases, primary cases in a closed environment, not as many secondary ones. But in super spreading events, most of the big ones, most of them, but not all of them, we know about indoor choir practice, indoor educational sessions. 6 of the major ones occurred indoors, but there was a ski resort in Austria where over 1,500 people got infected, and it's not very clear at all that was related to indoors. And there's some theories about chairlifts and gondola cars and spread there as well. So I think the bottom line here is just to be cautious. The other thing is that, and Senator Steinborn and I were talking about this last night, is that you have a much bigger pool of air outdoors than you do indoors. And so it logically makes sense that you could have less likelihood of spread if you're outdoors than indoors. But that only works if you're still wearing your mask and you're still staying 6 feet apart. And scientists are now, if you can imagine having a job like this, measuring that in the wind, those infectious droplets from a person with COVID, even just talking, can go 6 meters, which is 18 feet. If you sneeze, it can go 26 feet. So In some ways, the risk is greater because of wind and suspension of particles in the air. Polluted air tends to suspend more more particles. We do know that sunshine can kill the COVID virus, although up till now, all of the research is done on surfaces. And our concern, of course, now is person-to-person spread. Surface spread is less than 1/10 of 1% of COVID spread. So we know a lot more now than we did then. So I just want to go over those. The bottom line is wear a mask, stay 6 feet apart. You know, if you're going to go out and go camping, do it with your family. If you're going to go camping with people from a whole bunch of different families, even if it's your extended family, and when let me back up. Do it with your family, which is the people you live with. There's not very much increased risk. If you start doing camping and other events like that, then you have to remember the masks, the 6-foot distancing, and things like that. But so for now, until we get more evidence, I would think of outdoors as indoors. I would be just as safe outdoors as you are indoors. I had a lot of doctors. Dick Kozoll, who I've known for many years, was not one of the ones to call it. I don't think emailed me and complained about wearing a mask, but a lot of folks did, and it was really hard for me. I had to start wearing a mask when we did our bike trips. I had to start wearing a mask on our daily morning walks, and we do fast walking. And I just want to remind you that people ascending Mount Everest who are in training for that actually wear masks, different kinds of masks, to reduce. They actually put the tight-fitting masks with and pump in lower oxygen supply to be better conditioned. And I didn't think I would end up saying this, but it's quite clear to me now that I'm in much better physical condition after walking with a mask on for 3 or 4 months than I was beforehand. That's a study of one. It's not a randomized controlled trial, but I know I felt the benefits. So back to you, Senator.
Thank you. And I think it's important when you're outside. I mean, they've also done modeling of people on bikes and the jet stream that you're kind of emitting from your breath as you're riding, that you're definitely leaving a trail there for the people that you are passing. And so knowing that COVID doesn't immediately drop to the ground, I mean, it can suspend in the air for a while. Be cognizant of that you're when you're out there recreating, especially if you're moving fast, you're leaving perhaps even a longer trail of your breath, and an important reason why you need to wear a mask. And also when you're outdoor dining, I think sometimes I'm kind of shocked when I see large groups of people dining outdoors and nobody's wearing a mask, and they believe that being outdoors is a silver bullet, when in reality, you still need to be distanced. You still need to be wearing a mask when you're not eating the food, as far as I'm concerned, to be protective. And you shouldn't believe that it's a silver bullet just by virtue of stepping outdoors. You still need to take some common sense precautions. So Dr. Kozoll, I know you have some additional insights and thoughts on this subject about COVID precautions when outdoors, and feel free to add anything to that if you'd like.
I think Dr. Scrase covered the issue fairly well. I tend to think about who is out there, who are they with, and who are they near. So my general advice, at least to people in the Cuba area, is to avoid recreating in large groups. If you recreate with others, choose a bubble of people that you spend a fair amount of time with and are with regularly. Even with your bubble, maintain a distance among the participants. That's fairly easy to do with trail walking and other sorts of common outdoor recreations. I recommend wearing masks as much as possible, particularly if you're with anybody who is outside your bubble, or even someone in your bubble that you don't live with. I recommend people not avoid handling each other and be very careful with their hand, food, and water sanitation when they're on the trail or in other ways recreating outdoors. That's about all I have to add.
Thank you. Now, Johnny, in your work, where you're working around other people and food, you've had to take new precautions and make sacrifices. What are your pearls of wisdom on being safe outdoor environment with COVID?
Well, I'm kind of a unique scenario. My main part of the project is dinners. But since COVID started, I just had to close down the dinners. The main portion of the dinners is to, gather 10 to 12 people around one table to share this experience. And so there didn't quite seem a way to do that safely and also maintain the same experience. So I got to move on to other things this year. Got to work on the garden more, work on my ceramics more, and kind of like reflect on the structure of my project and start to work on making that better. Some things that I wouldn't have given myself time for normally. But I'm pretty lucky. I live in a place that's surrounded by close to 1 million acres of national forest up in northern New Mexico. So usually when I get outdoors, I don't see anyone. I think Dr. Kozoll and Dr. Scrase kind of talked about all the good precautions. Yeah, I don't have any to add to that.
The main thing we try to do at this conference is help local communities and local leaders walk away with ideas of what they can do to help their community. And in this case, we're talking about to be healthy and to utilize the outdoors to improve public health, to improve behavioral health and mental health challenges people are dealing with. And Dr. Kozoll, you created just an amazing program years ago around this concept as a medical doctor called Step into Cuba. And I would love to have you just take a few minutes and tell everyone about why you did it and what Step into Cuba is about and how other communities could create similar programs in their community.
Well, thank you, Senator Steinborn. You've perhaps opened Pandora's box here, because this is one of my favorite things to talk about. I think I'll start with what Step into Cuba is. It's basically a local program to promote physical activity on public lands that surround the Cuba area. And the program does that through a community campaign, through the development and maintenance of places to be physically active, particularly trails and sidewalks, as available programs of social support for people who don't tend to get outdoors and be active on their own, and also to a certain extent by using street and community level design strategies that will make getting outdoors the easy thing to do. Kind of the why did I get involved with it? I think I mentioned in my introduction that I've had a little extra time over the last 12 years, and Step into Cuba has been a 12-year program that's ongoing. I spent years before that caring for neighbors and patients in exam room settings, where I was able to witness a lot of lifestyle-related problems that I only had limited tools to deal with one-on-one as a doctor to patient. But I realized that there were a lot of community strategies, particularly surrounding physical activity and nutrition, that would be far more important than what I could accomplish one-on-one with people. Step into Cuba was a way to take some of that experience out into the community. And last but not least, like a lot of New Mexico communities, Cuba experienced in my decades of practice a rising tide of unhealthy weight, diabetes, complications of diabetes like renal disease. And it turns out that evidence shows that physical activity and being outdoors can be a major factor in both preventing the progression of a lot of diabetes and other chronic diseases like it. So that was a lot of the driving force for my interest. I had a lot of partners in this effort. They've come and gone to a various extent as need required. But one of my most faithful and important partners has been the University of New Mexico Prevention Research Center, that turned our project into a 10-year longitudinal study to see what kind of a difference we've made in the community. And we've got some very interesting evidence about what works and what doesn't work about our approach. Land managers have been critical partners, including the Santa Fe National Forest and the Rio Puerco Office of the Bureau of Land Management. The villages of Cuba and Sandoval County have been important. Our own nonprofit that's now the steward of a corridor of land that connects the village to the nearest corner of the National Forest have all been important partners. The Department of Transportation, our regional planning body, the Mid-Region Council of Governments, a lot of local organizations, the public schools, where we now have a network of trails open to the community, AMI Kids, an important juvenile justice program for the Southwest region, and my own health center program, the Presbyterian Medical Services checkerboard system. And finally, two other partners, Summer Youth Corps and the Continental Divide Trail Coalition, have been extremely important in our efforts.
Dr. Kozoll,
yeah.
Would you very briefly just explain what are the resources of Step Into Cuba? What are the mechanics of the trails and the other things that the pieces of the program?
Yeah, well, the pieces of the places to be outdoors and be active strategy vary depending on the landowner and what resources have come and gone. We have had several different areas of focus. So, for example, we created a asphalt surface park trail of about a mile's length that actually is about 1/3 of the distance from the center of town to our public school campus. So the park trail required involvement with the regional planning body, the Department of Transportation, an important resource that I believe is still available called the Recreational Trails Program. We had funding from that, as well as some supplemental grant funding, including an important one from the Albuquerque Community Foundation. We have another project. I mentioned a private strip of land that our nonprofit is steward of, that was donated by a private individual, and it's strategically located between the village limits and the National Forest west of Cuba. And we constructed that trail with community volunteers, with design assistance from the National Park Service, Recreation, Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. We got some help with acquisition and some help with maintenance from various individuals and Youth Corps. The school trails, another story. The new sidewalks in the village, another story. And a new segment of Continental Divide National Scenic Trail being done by the Forest Service and BLM, yet another story. So each of these efforts come together through a consolidated strategy. We did a pedestrian network assessment to see where people can walk and access all these places. We've tried to fill in the pieces on a map. We have been opportunistic in obtaining resources. I really don't think there's one formula for any community, but there are a lot of resources out there, and I think local planning bodies and local government and a lot of external entities like Department of Health, Department of Transportation are important in finding them.
Okay, so thank you for that. So I think what's important for all the communities out there listening are, in addition to tourism, making sure that you have some local spaces that are accessible, some trails, promoting the health benefits, doing public education. These are great resources that can be used by many in the community to improve health, improve mental health. And there are resources for getting those trails and spaces built. And now with the AXIS program at the Outdoor Recreation Division, there's also an outdoor infrastructure fund, which the state is raising money for as well, in addition to the federal pockets of money. So So thank you for that. And with that, I want to turn to an element a lot of people really aren't aware of. And there's a lot of background noise. Russ, I don't know if you can mute the other analysts real quick. Thank you. I'm going to be turning to Johnny for this question. So our outdoors is just an unbelievable medicine cabinet full of natural foods. And talk, Johnny, about food, using food as medicine, and the importance of eating healthy, natural things and endemic foods, and your whole journey into that world, and what New Mexicans can learn from that.
Yeah, something I'm really excited to talk about. When I left or came back to New Mexico, I had never heard this statistic, but when I started delving a little deeper, I read that New Mexico has the largest diversity of wild food plants in the country. And it makes sense with the varying ecosystems from southern New Mexico, kind of desert landscape, to northern New Mexico, high mountains. And so from those two polars in between, there's so much different diversity of plants and animals. But one of the big things for me and my project is, using these endemic foods that people from these lands have been using for generations as medicine, as preemptive medicine, and also just health. There's a lot of bad things that happen when we grow our food or raise our food with chemicals and pesticides and antibiotics, etc. So I think, the best food for us is food that is grown as close to nature as possible with the least amount of intervention. And by finding these wild foods in these wild places, you're able to find those foods that have been grown in exactly the right environment that they want, absorbing nutrients from the soil that has been interacting with mycelium for hundreds of years without being turned over or intervened with. So yeah, I think that by connecting closer to nature and these plants and animals that are all around us, we can, support our health a lot better than kind of looking to the grocery store for our food. But that also kind of translates to growing food as well. And I'm lucky to have some people in the village that I live in who grow really amazing food in a similar way. And so I'm surrounded by really amazing foods all the time. And I know that going to like an old timer's house and you look in their cabinet, you always see like a jar of Kota or Osha or rose hips. And so there has been this information for a long time, and it seems to kind of be dwindling. But within the last couple of years, I've noticed that it's been on people's radars a lot more. So it's exciting to be able to share information about these wild food medicinal plants that I know through the dinners, and to see people being a lot more open to it.
Excellent. I think you just described why we all we like green chili.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
It's not just tasty, but our bodies do well with it, and it's a traditional food. Dr. Kozoll and Dr. Scrase, do you have anything you'd like to add on this question in terms of the health benefits of eating organic, using natural plants as health remedies rather than a prescription drug? Dr. Scrase.
Yeah, I could just make a couple very, very quick comments. Number one is there's a very significant growing body of evidence that eating what's called the Mediterranean diet, which is a much more plant-based and non-meat-based sort of a diet, confers an unbelievable number of health benefits, longevity, reduction of incidence of heart attacks and strokes. That turns out that there are these little populations around the world where lots of people live to be 100 years old, and in every single one of them, they have a much healthier, what you would call a traditional American diet. They don't eat that. And so there's no question the diet has a huge effect on every aspect of our health. And I could give a longer list, but I don't think I need to. I think Johnny really covered it well.
Yeah, I would just add that when you look at what we generally consider healthy fruits and vegetables that we purchase at markets, most of them have their roots with natural foods many years ago. And if you look at what constitutes the healthy diet, the right balance of protein, carbohydrate, and fat, I think you'll find that introducing natural foods probably brings you a lot closer to that optimal distribution than relying on processed foods. So there's a lot of evidence for that. I don't know how important that can be for a lot of people, but where natural foods are available, particularly a wild source, it can do no harm. It can only do good.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm gonna ask the question here on the fly and kind of integrate what you're saying. You don't hear a lot of medical doctors talk about the importance of healthy eating, getting outdoors, what we might call natural health as a solution to a physical problem or a mental health problem, when in fact it's a very powerful way to treat these things and should always be considered, and less side effects too. So, and again, you don't hear many medical docs that are aware of that or will talk about it. And so it's great that we have two MDs here today who both are hip to that, as we would say, and understand that. And I think for everyone listening, understanding that as people are cooped up, feeling anxiety, feeling depressed, look at the way we're eating, look at the lack of activity, try to affect those things, try to get out and get some fresh air, get some exercise, eat a little more greens, eat less fried foods. You can improve your overall sense of well-being just by doing that. And that's a good recipe and good public policy. But here's a question that came in that I want to ask. Number one, would the state consider creating an outdoor RX program where we create maybe a public health campaign encouraging people to get outdoors for public health? That's one question. And I'll ask a second part of that. Can we envision a day when the state might reimburse costs for Medicaid patients involving outdoor recreation if it were prescribed by a doctor? So I'll pitch that two-part question to both you, Dr. Scrase and Dr. Kozoll.
Could I address the first part and then leave the second part for Dr. Scrase? Sure. I think I have a slide in there that talks about self-health benefits of nature exposure. Basically, there has been a very good meta-analysis of, a study that looked at the effect of immersion in nature for 120 or more minutes a week with self-reporting of well-being. If we could stay with this one. And what this study, among it's a good sample size, almost 20,000 people reporting the health benefits of being outdoors. And it turns out that spending a couple hours a week in nature has all the important health benefits. And these health benefits increase up to a maximum of about 200 to 300 minutes a week. And that pattern is consistent across a lot of key groups, including older adults and those with long-term health issues. And what I think is important for a lot of busy people is that you didn't have to get all 2, 3, or 4 hours in at the same time. You can break it up into small intervals and achieve the same health benefits. And those that did the study actually concluded that the next step were similar and more extensive long-term studies that might result in national weekly nature exposure guidelines that would kind of pattern themselves after physical activity guidelines that we've had in place since 2008. So I thought this was a fascinating direction, and perhaps we'll see this turn out to be a true prescription that can be used by anybody.
Dr. Scrase.
Yeah, on the question of a public health campaign about getting outdoors, and that would fit under the Department of Health and their way of thinking about things and doing things. And we're between secretaries right now, the Department of Health, and but I work really closely with Secretary Kunkel. I'm sure I'll work very closely with the next secretary, and happy to bring that idea up and sell that, actually. And the issue of what can Medicaid pay for, or what will they pay for, it is generally guided by the federal government. The state could pick something to pay for in Medicaid if we wanted to, and not get a federal match if it wasn't something that the federal government considered essential. We've had great success in applying for waivers to move that line further and further out to do more and more to meet the needs of our specific people. 850,000 folks we're serving here in New Mexico in the Medicaid program. But I can tell you right now, in the economic state we're in, that a general fund only expansion of benefit won't likely fly. And I think our best bet is to work with CMS on that. I use the evidence. As they say, the devil's in the details. I don't know why they say that, because I think there's sort of the salvation's in the details and working them all out. But I think we would have to lay out a framework of what would be considered a reimbursable expense for public outdoor activity and what would not. And that would not be an easy process. If you think through mileage to drive to a trailhead, and wear and tear on your car, and would it be new hiking shoes or not? What about one of those nifty backpacks with, the water supply that you just put in your mouth? I mean, so it's not as easy as it sounds. Would Medicaid support that and be happy to market that? Absolutely. But then we'd have to work out the details with the federal government about what we could and could not cover. Need to be a way that people would perceive as being fair and non-discriminatory in any way.
So, Dr. Scrase, do you think the insurance companies would fight us if we tried to get them to cover getting outdoors instead of a prescription drug? That's a rhetorical question.
I think we sort of see ourselves as partners with those three insurance companies that run Medicaid, and we include them enough in the process and development as we would include our customers and maybe some people at this seminar today, so that by the time we get to what we want to do, we're in lockstep basically with them. And of course, we pay them the extra money to cover the extra benefit, which is helps them be more enthusiastic about the innovations we put into the program. But I think on the commercial side, that would be a question for our superintendent, Russ Toll. But I think in general, the doctors that work in the state's health plans and even the national companies that own them, where that's true, have been familiar with the idea of prevention and the payoff of prevention for a very, very long time, and would likely be supportive.
Well, this is certainly, when we created the Outdoor Recreation Division, the public health benefits of getting outdoors is a huge recognized benefit of our great outdoors here in New Mexico and of promoting it. So this is something I'd love to work on more. And great question, whoever asked it, great questions and great ideas, and something that we can really help Mexicans with. Johnny, I'm getting some questions. People would love to know more about the SHED project and how they can get in touch with you. So number one, throw out there how people can get in touch with you and learn more about your work.
Yeah, so kind of on hiatus right now because of COVID and all of that, but working to really get started at the beginning of next year. And you can find all the information on my website, shed-project.com. There's an about section that has my contact info, and I know maybe a large portion of people watching now have Instagram. I keep up kind of a lot through Instagram, so that's a good way to stay in touch.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we got another question, Johnny, about how can we teach youth about the importance of growing food and community acequias? I'll start off the answer. I was telling Johnny yesterday about the outdoor equity program to get kids outdoors. And I think this type of program of getting kids outdoors to work with nature and learning some of these things could probably apply. We'd defer to Axie on that. But what's your answer to that, Johnny? How can we teach the youth about the importance of growing food and community acequias?
Good question. That's something that's been on my mind a lot. You know, growing up at the Pueblo in Taos, I remember kind of just roaming around and, you know, playing in nature with my friends and, you know, watching kids these days. You know, you don't really see them doing that as much. They're usually on a phone or watching the TV. And so that's just something that I'm really passionate about working towards in the future. I think anytime that you're working with such a large amount of people, say our public schools, it'd be really hard to format a program around that. But I live in a pretty small village. There's probably 10 to 20 kids who live there who I would like to start a portion of the project where they help farm and get to eat that food, and we go foraging together. And so it kind of seems like with the Outdoor Equity Fund that I just learned about that I think you started, right, Jeff?
Well, we started the Outdoor Recreation Division, and then that was part of that law. So yeah, I helped put it in the law.
Yeah, so I was psyched to hear about that. And yeah, it seems like once me and others find these different avenues of programs for the kids and get the resources to do that, that can be applied to larger amounts of people in the future.
Okay.
But
So
I do
now,
think,
I'm sorry, Johnny, go ahead.
but I was just going to say, but I do think it's a very important question and really exciting thing to start navigating.
Okay. So now I'm going to double back to the outdoor economics angle here, which is economic development. How can we then leverage good public health practices, getting outdoors, eating well? How can this double back to then create good local economic development in terms of jobs and opportunity? And Dr. Kozoll, I know you are also involved in a rural pathways program, which came out of the Department of Tourism. Talk a little bit about how these things can help create economic opportunity. Johnny, I'd like to ask you the same question.
All right, well, very briefly, Rural Pathways is actually a program offered by the New Mexico Department of Tourism. And we partnered with the Continental Divide Trail Coalition to try and promote 9 destinations in the Cuba area that we thought would be attractive not only to local people, but also day and weekend visitors. And so we've developed a kind of packaged marketing strategy. Just to clarify, we've not yet implemented it, but we have designed materials and a strategy for distributing them both to local people online and to visitors through places that they would tend to stop in Cuba, either during COVID or hopefully post-COVID. Once again, the strategy would be to make sure those places were visitor friendly, have good directions from a central kiosk in town of how to get there, make sure that people knew that what they were getting into, and to make sure they knew the time that would be required to enjoy the destination. And we've developed postcards, rack cards, a tourist guide and map, bags to distribute those sorts of materials to local people and so forth. So we're ready to go. COVID has put us on hold a bit, but we're hopeful that outdoor recreation will be one of the first activities to open up a little more broadly, and I think this strategy with rural pathways fits fairly well.
Okay, great. And Johnny, with your work, what kind of opportunities do you envision creating economic for the community?
Yeah, so kind of mentioned the work with the children and the farming and kind of that on a larger scale. I'm planning on opening up or restoring an old mercantile up here in the village that I'm at, and being able to sell high quality goods to people in the community, and to offer the jobs to people working in that space, working to help grow the food. And I'm also hoping on working on a journal, either bi-quarterly or annually, that kind of describes a lot of the information that I'm uncovering in my process, whether it's about the wild food plants or farming practices or anything else that kind of pertains to that. And so I hope to spread that information through all those different avenues.
Okay, great. Guys, we're a little over, but I'm going to ask one final question. And Dr. Schrace, thanks for sticking with us. One final question. What, if any, policies would you like to see your local community, state, federal, or tribal government enact to further this mission of getting people outdoors and to be healthy?
Yeah, I can start just really briefly, Senator Steinborn. I think we have a great start. I think the the division that's been created and the funding for that. As you know, pretty much everything hinges on appropriations, and so I would probably say let's get really good at what we've already set up. Let's fund that even more. I could imagine a time in the future where communities across New Mexico could, in some light and informal way, compete with each other to see who could mobilize the most number of people to spend time outdoors and develop pathways and safe walkways for seniors. Since I'm a geriatrician and they're my people, I'd love to see more opportunities there. But I think we're on a great start, and I would just encourage further funding for what we already have in place. Pick a couple key priorities like we're talking about today and work to make those grow.
Okay, thank you. Johnny, you have any thoughts?
I think Dr. Scrase hit it on the head, but learning about recently the Outdoor Equity Fund and how something like that can make what I do a lot more accessible and more viable is exciting, and I'm excited to learn more about those, and I hope that kind of trend continues.
Cool. Dr. Kozoll?
Yeah, I would be hopeful that as resources like those recently freed up by the Great American Outdoors Act become available, that policymakers and decision makers become aware of the health aspects of the plans for using those funds. So I would be particularly optimistic if we were designing things that would increase active transportation in nearby communities, that is ways for people to get from point A to point B as part of daily living. I'd like to see us doing health impact assessments, walkability workshops, and other things that will gather public input and help us create venues that people will truly use and enjoy. I'd like to address safety concerns. Some of the obstacles I mentioned earlier, I'd like to see, those concerns addressed in the design of recreational venues we create. And of course, I don't think anything could be more important than incorporating natural environments and environmental curricula into preschool and elementary school education. Just as an aside, we have a kind of a visionary preschool teacher in Cuba who's planning an outdoor classroom with stations on a pretty impressive natural environment adjacent to the schools. And that sort of approach not only holds a lot of promise for improved child development and education, but also makes a lot of sense for COVID days. So those are some of the policy directions I'd like to see us pursue.
Excellent. Well, guys, thank you so much for taking your time for this very enlightening and educational panel discussion. And it's been a pleasure having the discussion with you. And with that, I will turn this back over to Axie Navas to tell you what's next.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We had so many questions come in, very engaged audience that I know took away a lot of information from this panel. I love to talk about the Outdoor Equity Fund. We actually funded a Sequia program through that inaugural grant cycle, Mila Brazos in Guadalupe County. And so they're getting kids out there onto farms, onto ranches, learning about acequias and how important water is to those communities. So yes, we are going to take a 15-minute break, and we will be back at noon sharp to learn about the Great American Outdoors Act and other funding sources that are available right now that will become available this year to bring more outdoor recreation to your community. So we have a pretty incredible group of people lined up to talk about that in detail. Stick with us, stay with us. We will be back in just about 15 minutes. Thanks so much.